Welcome to the Atlas Cast for Building Your Business, presented by best-selling author, speaker, and sales and business growth consultant, Archer Atlas. And here's your host, Archer Atlas.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Atlas Cast for Building Your Business. If you'd like to get the transcript as well as show notes for this episode and every episode, head on over to theatlascast.com and subscribe. You'll get transcripts, show notes, and updates when a new episode is posted, as well as 2 free gifts: my best-selling book, Building Your Business Without Breaking the Bank, and the audio program, Going Up, how to generate more and better leads quickly and inexpensively, just for subscribing. Go to theatlascast.com to subscribe now. Okay, welcome to episode 4 of the Atlas Cast. This episode, we're going to pick up where we left off last time with the ask approach to non-cold calling, non-telemarketing, non-telesales. We're also going to take a small step back and get a big picture overview of what exactly this system looks like and is, and talk about the process and strategy of this system. We'll also cover one of the biggest killers there is, perfectionism, and how to overcome it. Alright, just to recap, the ask approach is not telemarketing, traditional cold calling, telesales, or even really selling at all. With all of those things, you're an uninvited pest, an annoyance, someone that interrupts the day of the people being called, trying to sell them something they don't want or need for the most part, or worse, they do want or need but are still unwilling to do what's in their best interest because of their distaste and disdain for you and their desire to spite you. No, what we're talking about is something completely different. And while you may appear at first glance to be an uninvited pest and annoyance, like everyone else that calls your prospects, what we're going to do will set you apart right away and actually provide value to the prospect while asking a reasonable request before fully qualifying the prospect and moving them one step closer to being your client or customer. So last episode we covered the opening of the call. Let's quickly take a step back and talk about the entire process, the strategy behind it, and the overall system that starts off with the ask approach. It's worth it right now to see this because you can't hit a target you can't see, and if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Alright, so let's take a look at this system, its process, and the logical progression of it all. So, first off, you want to generate qualified leads. Once you qualify these prospects, provide value for them, and get some agreements on them giving you an open ear in the future, the next step in the progression is to make that first sale. After the first sale is made, the relationship changes dramatically. Once someone gives you their money, regardless of how much or little it is, the relationship is changed completely. This person has now become your client, and with that, you've earned a lot more of their trust and also more of their time and much more of an open ear from them. That money they've sent you has earned it. So now that you have some of their money and more of an open ear, you've actually become much more of a trusted advisor. So with that comes the next step. I call this the schmooze call. A schmooze call is basically a getting to know you call where you start to really establish a bond between you and the client and really start to demonstrate your credibility and why you're different from everyone else and why it just makes logical sense to do business with you. It's not a sales call at all, though. There's no selling, and we'll get deeper into this and all these steps later on. Okay, so after the prospect becomes a qualified lead, and after the qualified lead makes that first purchase, and after the now client is schmoozed, the next step is to make more sales. Sales that bring in more money. After that, some of these clients will go on to become your biggest and best clients. Some don't. But there are always a percentage of clients, no matter what business you're in, there's always a small percentage of clients that account for the majority of your revenue. I call these your A clients. Okay, so that's the logical progression of this system that starts with the ask approach. Let's run through it one more time with an example of it. I'll continue with the theme of last week and run you through exactly what I did as a stockbroker in that highly regulated industry that doesn't allow you to do any marketing or advertising and where you're pretty much left having to cold call and cold call alone to get business. Alright, so it all starts off with that first call where we're trying to generate qualified leads. I'm going to run you through the exact pitch I used way back when I was a cold caller. Now, I'm not in love with this pitch at all. There's a lot of improvements that can be made, but this worked very well. At one point, I had cold callers working for me that were generating up to almost 20 qualified leads a day with this exact pitch. And as you'll see later, 20 leads is a lot for this industry and has the potential to bring in some big money if they are worked correctly. Okay, here's the pitch. Hey John, Archer Atlas Stock International. Reason for the call? I'm with a full-service brokerage firm here on Wall Street, not a sales call. Just want to introduce myself, send you some literature, and down the road, run one major recommendation. Fair enough? So that was the opener of the pitch. Now to make things simple and stay on schedule for this episode, let's cut to the chase and say we got a yes. Don't worry. In future episodes, we're going to completely run through this call, how you can handle objections, and show how you can apply these principles in your business to generate more leads, enlarge your clientele, increase your revenue, and grow your bottom line. For now, let's just run through an overview of this and what happens after we get a yes. So the prospect says yes, agrees to what this pitch is offering, which honestly is kind of a weak offering of some literature in exchange for giving an open ear to hear the next recommendation or stock pick. That's basically what the offer of value is here and the reasonable request is. Like I said, I'm not in love with the pitch, but it worked well and it still is working today. So after getting a yes, the next step is to qualify the prospect, verify the contact information and where to send the value, the literature, and shore up the prospect by requesting again that future open ear. So after that, a successful ask approach, the prospect turned qualified lead is sent the literature, which is the offer of value, and is set up for the second contact. This step right here is where we're going to leave off and focus on in terms of the scope of this episode. Like I said, we're going to cover all of this all the way through in future episodes. But time is limited here, and I want to make sure I cover the basics and the basis for the ask approach and where we're going. But just so we know where exactly we're going, what's being set up as the next step and the outcome we're going to attempt to achieve, let's just move forward really quickly and talk about the next contact, the first sale. All right, the first sale is the most important one. Without it, nothing happens. You can generate millions of leads from now until the cows come home, but without any first sales and subsequent sales that come after, you have nothing. So the first sale should be set up in such a way where it is easiest for the prospect to say yes. This first sale I made with this system and process when I was a broker was made on a very small first trade with zero commission and actually had me taking a loss to open the account. Now don't ever be afraid to go negative or break even on the first sale. With this system, you're always going to be able to make it up on the back end. All right. We're moving a little bit beyond the scope of this episode, but just know this. Buying changes the relationship. Buying changes everything. When the prospect buys, you now have their trust and you have an open ear to explain yourself, your methodology, and why you're different. You really can't do this until they buy, or you won't be as successful in doing this anyway. Here's just a quick example of what I'm talking about. So when I was a broker and I was using this system that started off with an ask approach type call that we just covered, the next step was to open an account with this prospect on a small trade, 100 shares of a $30 to $40 stock on zero commission with me taking a loss opening the account between paying for FedEx back and forth to and from the client and me covering the ticket charges the exchange charged. So I would basically sell the prospect on the relationship above all. I'd tell them that I was completely confident in the stock I was selling and that they should judge me on this stock and then determine for themselves if I was as good as I claimed I was based on this stock's performance. Now, I didn't know what was going to happen with the stock. And to be honest, just buying and selling stocks was not how I made my clients money. But a relationship has to start off somewhere and it has to be as easy as possible to start. It's not going to work overcomplicating things. Truth be told, the way I made my clients money was implementing covered call strategies where we would buy the stock and then sell the call option on the stock, which basically sold the right to sell the stock to another investor, which brought in a premium for the client. Now, this can be a complicated process, especially for people not used to buying and selling options or working with option strategies. And it can be hard to explain, especially to someone that has no reason to listen to you because they have no money with you already. So even though this was a powerful strategy that can and did work very well for the client, it's hard to explain, and it just isn't going to be sold on a first sale. It would be foolish to try and explain this to someone that has no vested interest in hearing what you have to say or making a complicated purchase. So the easy thing to do was make a first sale for a low risk, low cost on something easy. It's a lot easier to understand, maybe not exactly believe, but understand that a stock I'm talking about is going to go up than to try and understand a complicated sale from someone you haven't done business with in the past. Okay, let's take a step back and get back on track talking about the ask approach and the system it's part of. Let's talk about the numbers for a second. My first day at my first firm after graduating college, I get pulled into a conference room and have this funnel explained to me. The funnel basically has calls at the top of it, followed by qualified leads, then accounts, then what was labeled gross below it at the bottom. So my manager basically explained how the business of being a broker was really a simple one, that all boiled down to calls being made and letting the law of averages go to work for you. He said that on average, 3% of contacts become qualified leads. 10% of qualified leads go on to open accounts. 10% of accounts opened end up being top accounts, accounts you could do gross off of, which means charge high commissions. So with that, he ran through the numbers, plugging them in. He said that I, as a cold caller, was expected to make at least 500 calls a day and plugged in the numbers from there. 500 calls per day times 20 days in a month equals 10,000 calls. 10,000 calls times 3% is 300 qualified leads. 300 qualified leads times 10% gives you 30 accounts opened, and 30 accounts opened times 10% gives you 3 A clients. He said that each A client should be worth at least $10,000 net to you, with most of that coming early in the relationship. So while 500 calls might sound daunting, the prospect of earning $30,000 was pretty appealing, especially since I had just graduated and never made any kind of real money before that. Anyway, those are the numbers, or I should say those were the numbers for that business. The fact is, I'm going to show you how to improve those numbers, especially the ones at the top of the funnel, so that you don't have to make 10,000 calls a month, and you could have calls that are all the more impactful, leaving a better impression, and are more conducive to growing your business. Now, I just want to cover one more thing about these numbers. As we talked about in earlier episodes, when you sell and sell alone, you only attract the attention of a small percentage of total buyers. It's typically 3 to 10%. When you generate leads, you attract the attention of much more people and give yourself a better chance of selling to a larger number of the total buyers in the marketplace for what you offer. So generating leads, instead of selling, produces better results. Conservatively, 1 to 300% better results. Conservatively. And it makes complete sense. Who would you have a better chance of getting to become a customer or client? Someone that hears your pitch once and makes a decision right there on that alone? Or someone that gets some value from you and then is able to hear your message multiple times and have multiple offers being made to them? Obviously, it's the second one. Now, the same thing goes for people that buy from you. Someone who gives you their money and buys from you once, regardless of how small a purchase it is 20 times more likely to buy again. 20 times more likely than someone who has never bought before. So with that, it makes sense to generate the maximum amount of leads possible and to make it as easy as possible for these leads to buy the first time, even if it means breaking even or taking a loss. We're going to cover all of this in the coming episodes. But for right now, I want to talk about one last thing when it comes to the ask approach and actually picking up the phone and calling people. Like I said before, without a sale, nothing happens. Even if you can generate millions of leads without any sales being made, you're going to be out of business pretty quickly. But you can't generate any leads if you or your staff don't pick up the phone and generate those leads. So what we're going to talk about is probably the number one reason the phone gets avoided and is not picked up. Perfectionism. Now, don't get me wrong. When you use the ask approach, you want to make sure you have a good pitch and you want to make sure you deliver it sharply. But don't ever let that desire to be perfect get in the way of actually getting things done. I've seen this over and over again. Guys spending days, weeks, even months just sitting down and writing their pitch, editing it, and trying to make it perfect. First off, it's never going to be perfect. You're never going to deliver it perfectly 100% of the time. And the fact is, you won't even know what works best until you test it out and try different things. So the best thing you could do is actually get on it and actually use it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be done and actually used. This actually reminds me of something my old boss used to tell me, the same one who ran my first firm. He'd say, do something, even if it's wrong. Now, I'm not advocating that you do anything illegal or unethical, and neither was he. He was basically saying, take action. Just do it. Okay, so perfectionism is a killer and actually is an illusion. Again, you won't know what even works until you test it, and you'll never know what's perfect. And that goes for scripting your pitch, your ask approach, your sales pitches, your presentations, and so on. It goes for the delivery of the pitch too. Don't be one of those theorists that practice their pitch over and over in a room instead of actually using it. Believe me, the first time you do anything, it's going to be rusty and unpolished. But actually doing, not just practicing in theory, shortens the curve dramatically. You can't simulate game speed. You actually have to just play the game. Okay, so with this, two examples come to mind. One about writing and one about actually performing, doing. So performing. I don't know how true this is, but I've heard it a bunch of times from multiple sources about the way the rapper Jay-Z creates and records his songs. Rumor has it that when he goes to make a song, he'll sit in the studio and listen to the beat for 20 minutes or so and compose the lyrics in his head. He doesn't write anything down. He then gets in the booth and starts recording, verbalizing what was in his head. He does this in one take and is done with the track. No edits, no redos, none of that. From his head directly to CD. Now, his music isn't exactly my cup of tea, but it's hard to argue with someone as successful and worth over $500 million based on this practice, especially in an industry that's shrinking in terms of sales and has average earnings of around $34,000 a year. So it's worth learning something here. The other example I want to mention is on writing. Jack London used to write it once. No editing, no self-editing, and no laboring on one sentence or paragraph. Just write it once and it's done. Now, it also happened to be damn near perfect too in his case. Word is his editors and publishers would hate editing his writing. In the publishing industry, especially when he wrote, length cost. The more pages there were, the more it cost to produce a book. And London's writing was done in a way that it was nearly impossible to edit things out without ruining the overall flow. So they couldn't edit it. Anyway, one more interesting thing about Jack London and his love-hate relationship with editors. When he was first published, the editor of The Atlantic loved the story he submitted, but wanted to edit his name and change it to John, a more Christian and proper-sounding name. When he refused to make the change, the next 3 stories he submitted were denied publishing, and one of them, I forget which, it's not important, wound up being one of his best and most critically acclaimed. All right, the point of these examples is this. Probably none of us are as talented and able as Jay-Z or Jack London. And the fact is, most people, even at the tops of their industries, aren't able to create something perfect immediately without editing the first time out. Mozart used to labor endlessly in creating his pieces. Salinger only wrote a handful of books in his life. But the fact is, just because we might not be able to create something perfect the first time out and quickly, or probably ever, doesn't mean we should let the pursuit of perfection without action get in the way of actually taking action. The best, most compelling pitch ever created and never used sells nothing. A mediocre pitch used often makes sales. And sales are what's important. Anyway, this episode has really gone long. Next time out, we're going to really go over the ask approach and run through it line by line, giving examples of what works, what doesn't, how to handle objections, and how to take it to the next step, which brings the person being called one step closer to becoming your client by first becoming one of your qualified leads. It's going to be great, and I'm looking forward to spending the entire episode running through this with examples. I'll see you then. Oh, by the way, If you'd like the transcript to this show and all others, as well as show notes and a free copy of my best-selling book, Build Your Business Without Breaking the Bank, you can get all of it free simply by going to the atlascast.com and subscribing. You'll get it all, plus the audio program Going Up, how to generate more and better leads quickly and inexpensively, which goes into even more detail on the Ask approach. All of it free as a thank you for subscribing. Just go to the atlascast.com and subscribe. This ends episode 4 of the Atlas Cast for Building Your Business. Like I said, next episode we'll continue where we left off and really get down to the nuts and bolts of generating more and better qualified leads with the Ask approach. See you then.